The celebrated scholar smirked across the marble table, his voice carrying the arrogance of a man who had dismissed countless dreamers before. "A child's sketch," he declared, holding the brittle parchment high in front of the gathered historians. The young archaeologist, Marcus Levin, stood frozen, heat creeping up his neck as laughter echoed through the vaulted hall of the academy. The ink of centuries seemed to blur under the lights, the fragile Roman map clutched in the hands of men who refused to believe. They saw only a forgery. Marcus saw destiny. He remembered the day he found it, tucked inside the cracked spine of a forgotten codex, buried in the monastery archives of Ravenna. Dust had painted every corner of that chamber in gray silence, but something in the way the codex refused to close had beckoned him closer. The page fell out as though time itself had been waiting for his touch. The parchment bore faint lines, almost erased, but unmistakably Roman: roads, coastlines, and then something startling. A city, a circle drawn in precise Roman cartography, where no city was ever recorded. Why would they hide it? Marcus's voice had trembled that night, whispering only to himself. He was young, barely 30, his career overshadowed by towering names who had published volumes before his first paper even saw print. Still, something inside him, the voice of a restless heart, told him this was not chance. Now, in the academy, their laughter struck like whips. "A forgery," one expert repeated. "Likely a monk's doodle, worthless." Another adjusted his spectacles, dismissing the young man with the cruel kindness reserved for a naïve apprentice. "Forget it, Marcus, do real work." But inside, Marcus's thoughts flared with indignation. They laugh because they fear. They dismiss because they cannot imagine being wrong. He thought of his father, a quiet schoolteacher who had once told him, "The greatest discoveries are born from questions no one dares to ask." Marcus clenched his jaw. He would not abandon this. As the scholars filed out muttering, he stayed behind, staring at the parchment lying discarded on the table. The map almost seemed to whisper under the lamplight. He traced the faint lines with a trembling finger, following the roads until his eyes locked on the circle again. An unnamed city, a forbidden one. Behind him, the custodian of the hall, an elderly man with stooped shoulders, shuffled by with his broom. He paused, glancing at the parchment. "Strange thing, isn't it?" His voice cracked but held curiosity. "I've cleaned this hall for 40 years, seen 1,000 maps, but never one with markings like that." Marcus's heart raced. "You see them too?" The custodian nodded, eyes narrowing. "Symbols, hidden, faint, but they're there. You're not mad, boy." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a flicker of validation. His isolation cracked. He folded the map gently, sliding it into his satchel, a decision solidifying within him. He would pursue the truth, with or without their blessing. That night, in his small apartment overlooking the cobblestones of Rome, he spread the map across his desk, candlelight dancing over its creases. He closed his eyes and imagined the cartographer's hand, centuries ago, sketching roads meant to be seen, and then adding a city meant to be erased. What secret did the Romans bury so deeply that even now their shadow still lingered? As he leaned closer, the smell of ancient parchment filling his lungs, something caught his eye. Tiny indentations along the city's circle, almost invisible unless tilted against the flame. His heart thudded. These were not random marks. They looked deliberate, like a code only the patient could uncover. A gust rattled the shutters, plunging the room into deeper shadows. Marcus shivered, not from cold, but from the sudden weight of the moment. He whispered aloud, as though someone unseen was listening, "They wanted this hidden, but I will find it." He felt both fear and exhilaration. The scholars could laugh. The world could call him a fool. But within that parchment lay a challenge, and he was ready to stake everything to answer it. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Professor Giancarlo's life. The flicker of the candle lit his determined eyes as he pressed his hand to the map. Marcus Levin was no longer just an archaeologist. He had become a seeker of forbidden truths, and the first step had already been taken. The room was silent except for the scratch of Marcus's pencil as he traced the faint indentations into clearer lines. He leaned over the map, his face lit by the flicker of candlelight. At first, they seemed like random impressions, shallow scars left by time. But as he copied them onto fresh paper, the marks began to form something deliberate, tiny geometric shapes, aligned as though pointing toward a path beyond the edges of the known Roman world. Marcus's breath quickened. He adjusted the parchment, tilting it under the flame, and their faint, almost imperceptible were symbols resembling constellations. His mind reeled. Why would a Roman map carry hidden star patterns? The Romans were practical, builders of roads and aqueducts, not dreamers who disguised their cities in riddles. Unless, he thought, this was no ordinary city. He sat back, rubbing his tired eyes, the shadows deepening in his modest apartment. Doubt tried to creep in. Am I just seeing what I want to see? The mocking voices of the academy returned, their laughter stabbing like knives. A child's sketch. Worthless. Forget it. He clenched his fists, number he would not yield. His mind drifted back to childhood evenings, when his father would spread books across their kitchen table. Every map, his father once said, tells two stories, the one that is drawn and the one that is hidden. Marcus had dismissed it as philosophy back then, but now, staring at this parchment, he felt his father's words thrum with life. Driven by a restless urgency, Marcus gathered his notes and hurried to the university library. The night watchman eyed him with suspicion but waved him through. In the deserted reading hall, he pulled ancient astronomy scrolls from the shelves, comparing the drawn constellations with the indentations on the map. Hours passed in silence until his finger froze over a page. A cluster of stars, the same formation etched on the parchment, aligned perfectly with the sky above southern Italy 2,000 years ago. His pulse raced. The map wasn't just geographic, it was astronomical, designed to reveal itself only to those who looked to the heavens. The circle of the Forbidden City, aligned with a rare conjunction, a cosmic event that Roman priests might have considered sacred or dangerous. Why hide it in stars? Marcus whispered into the silence. Behind him, a soft cough startled him. He spun around. A figure stood at the end of the aisle. Professor Giancarlo, the same man who had ridiculed him earlier that week. His tall frame loomed in the half-light, eyes narrowing on the parchment Marcus clutched. You still chasing shadows? Giancarlo's voice was sharp, tinged with disdain. The academy laughed. Yet here you are, breaking into libraries to feed your obsession. Marcus's heart pounded. This isn't obsession. Look. He spread the papers across the table, pointing to the matching constellations. They align. This city wasn't erased for nothing, it was hidden. Giancarlo stepped closer, his lips curling in a smirk. And you think you've outsmarted centuries of scholars? That a boy barely out of graduate robes has found what Rome itself tried to bury? Marcus swallowed hard but forced himself to meet his mentor's piercing gaze. I think Rome feared what they found there. And I think you do too. The professor's expression flickered, just for an instant, betraying something Marcus hadn't expected: fear. But it vanished quickly, replaced with cold dismissal. Burn that parchment, Levin. It will destroy you. Without another word, Giancarlo turned and walked into the shadows, leaving the echo of his footsteps hanging in the vast hall. Marcus's hands trembled. The warning lingered like poison in the air. But so did the professor's fleeting fear. Why would Giancarlo, a man so confident, look terrified at the mention of a forgotten city? He gathered the map in his notes, determination solidifying. If even Giancarlo feared it, then Marcus knew he was on the right path. The hidden marks were not the end, they were the beginning. As dawn broke over Rome, Marcus stood at his window, watching the first light spread over the cobblestones. The city stirred awake, unaware that beneath its ancient stones a secret still pulsed, waiting to be unearthed. Marcus whispered to the morning air, as if promising the dead and the living alike, "I will find this city, no matter the cost." Marcus returned to his apartment with the map clutched against his chest, the echo of Giancarlo's warning still gnawing at his mind. He placed it on the desk and stared as though it were alive, daring him to continue. The constellations, the alignment, none of it was coincidence. But why would Rome, an empire that celebrated conquest, deliberately erase a city from memory? The answer came not from speculation, but from another discovery. In the days that followed, Marcus combed the archives of forgotten monasteries and dusty university vaults. He bartered favors, called in debts, and slipped through cracks in bureaucracy where doors were normally locked. On the fifth night of searching, he stumbled upon a bundle of scrolls written in Latin, brittle and nearly illegible. By candlelight, he translated, his breath catching as words emerged. Civitas Vetita, the forbidden city. Those who enter shall not return. His hand froze, the ink on the parchment whispering of doom. The scroll described a city deep in the mountains, one where Rome sent its most dangerous exiles and prisoners. It spoke of rituals, plagues, and a curse so terrifying that the Senate ordered the place erased from every map, every record. Marcus leaned back, his pulse thundering in his ears. This wasn't just a city. It was a wound Rome wanted forgotten. A knock shattered the silence. Marcus startled, nearly dropping the scroll. He crossed the room cautiously. On the other side of the door stood the old custodian from the academy, clutching a small leather pouch. His eyes darted nervously down the corridor. "They shouldn't know I'm here," the old man whispered, stepping inside quickly when Marcus opened the door. He pressed the pouch into Marcus's hands. "You're not the first to chase that map." Marcus's fingers shook as he untied the pouch. Inside lay fragments of parchment burned at the edges, as though someone had tried to destroy them. The markings matched his map perfectly. "My brother," the custodian began, voice trembling. "He followed that trail 40 years ago. He never came back. Only these scraps returned, left at my door by hands I never saw." His eyes filled with sorrow. "Leave it buried, boy. That city is cursed." Marcus swallowed hard, the words lodging like stones in his chest. But even as fear prickled at his skin, another voice rose within him, the insistent whisper of truth. Curses are the tools of those who wish to keep power hidden. Alone again, he spread the fragments beside his map. Together, they revealed more detailed routes through mountains, notations of rivers long dried, and warnings etched in Latin, "Do not cross. The silence kills." Exhaustion overtook him, and he slumped into his chair. In the haze of half-sleep, he imagined Roman soldiers marching into the city, never to return. He heard whispers of senators swearing oaths to blot out its memory. And he saw, in his dream, the city itself, gates looming, shadows stretching, secrets calling. He woke with a gasp, sweat soaking his shirt. The first light of dawn seeped through his window, cold and pale. His decision had crystallized. Whether curse or truth, Rome had buried something worth risking everything to conceal. Marcus folded the map and the fragments into his satchel, his hands steady now. He spoke into the still air, his voice low but resolute. "They tried to scare me into silence, but history isn't theirs to bury. I will follow where this map leads." The city of silence, the forbidden place, awaited him. And with every step, Marcus felt both the weight of dread and the thrill of destiny tightening around his soul. The train rattled eastward, carrying Marcus through the rugged landscapes of southern Italy. Outside the window, olive groves stretched endlessly before giving way to barren hills, their shadows sharp beneath the rising sun. The map rested inside his satchel, every bump of the journey a reminder of the risk he had chosen. He should have felt exhausted after weeks of sleepless research, but instead, a restless fire kept him awake. Each mile brought him closer to the city Rome had buried in silence. He traced the routes in his notebook again and again. The fragments from the custodian's pouch were clear. The path began where 3 rivers once converged near Calabria's mountains. Ancient roads, now broken and forgotten, would guide him deeper inland. Yet even with this clarity, unease gnawed at him. The Latin warnings echoed in his mind. Do not cross. The silence kills. At a remote station, Marcus disembarked, carrying only his satchel and a battered rucksack. The town was little more than a cluster of stone houses, weathered by time. He stopped at a small tavern for bread and water, his presence drawing curious stares from locals. When he unfolded the map on the wooden counter, the innkeeper froze. "Where did you get that?" the man demanded, his voice low, his weathered face tightening with fear. Marcus hesitated. "An old archive." "Why?" The innkeeper leaned closer, whispering so only Marcus could hear. "My grandfather spoke of that place. He said the Romans cursed it. Soldiers went there, but none returned." "It's not on your modern maps for a reason, Signore." His eyes flicked nervously toward the door, as though even speaking of it summoned danger. "You're a fool if you go." Marcus thanked him, but folded the map firmly, his jaw set. "I'll take my chances." He set out alone, following a path that wound into the hills. The deeper he trekked, the quieter the world became. Birds grew scarce. The wind carried only the faint whistle of emptiness, and even the crunch of gravel beneath his boots felt intrusive. At night, he camped beneath ancient pines, staring at the stars that had once guided Roman surveyors. The same constellation that had appeared on the parchment shone above him, steady and unblinking, as though watching his progress. On the 3rd day, he reached the ruins of an old Roman outpost, half swallowed by vines. He traced his hand along the mossy stones, imagining soldiers once stationed here, their orders to guard a path no one was meant to travel. He could almost hear their thoughts, resentful, fearful, bound by duty to watch over a road leading to silence. That night, as he cooked a meager meal over the fire, Marcus's mind turned inward. What if Giancarlo was right? What if this will destroy me? Yet alongside the doubt came another voice, his father's quiet certainty. Every hidden truth waits for one stubborn soul to uncover it. The following morning, he pressed onward. The terrain grew harsher, the trail vanishing into jagged rock and tangled brush. His muscles ached, his hands bled from pulling himself up cliffsides, but the thought of turning back never entered his mind. Every hardship seemed like a test laid down by centuries of silence, daring him to prove himself worthy. By dusk, Marcus reached a narrow gorge where the remnants of an ancient road emerged, carved directly into the stone. His breath caught. The map had led him here, unmistakably. The fading sun painted the rocks blood red, and for a moment he felt as though he were stepping not forward, but backward, into a time when Rome's soldiers marched this very path, their sandals striking the stone, their eyes filled with dread. He set up camp at the gorge's mouth, the silence pressing against him like a living thing. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though no movement stirred in the shadows. Sleep came only in fits, broken by strange dreams of chanting voices and cities built of fire. When dawn finally broke, he tightened his pack and whispered to himself, steadying his breath. This is it, the last stretch. And with that, Marcus stepped into the gorge, leaving behind the world of the living for the path Rome had tried to erase. The gorge narrowed until the walls of stone loomed so high above Marcus that the sky became only a thin strip of pale light. Every sound magnified the scrape of his boots, the clink of his canteen against his satchel, even the faint thud of his heartbeat. Yet beneath these echoes lay another rhythm, something less natural, as though the silence itself pulsed. Halfway through the gorge, Marcus froze. Ahead, the ancient Roman road was scarred by deep gouges, as if massive claws had raked across the stone. He crouched, running his fingers along the grooves. They were deliberate, carved with tools, not beasts, words, Latin letters. He whispered the translation aloud, his voice trembling. Non redibus, you shall not return. A chill gripped him. and for the first time, doubt pressed heavy. This was no accident of erosion, it was a warning carved by men who had walked before him. He almost turned back. Almost. But the fire inside him, the same stubborn blaze that had carried him from Ravenna's monastery to this cursed gorge, pushed him forward. By dusk, he emerged onto a plateau. The land stretched barren and gray, littered with stones that resembled ruins, fallen columns, fragments of walls, the skeletal remains of a settlement abandoned to time. He collapsed against a rock, exhaustion dragging at his limbs. His provisions were dwindling. His body ached, yet his mind was restless, caught between exhilaration and dread. That night, as he stared into the small fire he had built, Marcus heard the unmistakable crunch of footsteps behind him. He shot up, hand instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to his pack. "Easy," a voice called from the shadows. A figure stepped into the firelight, a man in his 40s, dark-haired, rugged, his eyes sharp and wary. He carried no torch, yet he seemed to have moved through the darkness effortlessly. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. The man smiled faintly. "Someone who's been following you since Rome." Marcus's chest tightened. "Giancarlo sent you." "Not exactly." The man crouched near the fire, warming his hands without invitation. "Let's just say there are others, people far more powerful than your professor, who don't want that city found, and they pay well to ensure it stays buried." Marcus's pulse pounded. "So what are you? A mercenary? An assassin?" The man shrugged. "Names don't matter. What matters is choice. You can walk away now, live your life, and no harm will come to you. Or," his eyes flicked to the satchel resting at Marcus's side, "keep chasing your obsession, and you'll regret it." Marcus's thoughts whirled. He had expected ridicule, maybe even danger from the terrain. But he hadn't imagined human opposition, organized, funded, determined to keep the past hidden. Why? What truth was so devastating that men would be hired to silence it? He tightened his grip on the satchel. "I'm not walking away." The man's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "Then you're more of a fool than I thought." Without another word, he stood and disappeared into the darkness as silently as he had come, leaving Marcus alone with his fire and pounding fear. Sleep eluded him. Every crack of the earth, every gust of wind, felt like approaching footsteps. He replayed the encounter, dissecting the man's words. Others, powerful men. It meant Giancarlo wasn't acting alone. The professor's fear, his warning, it was part of something larger. A conspiracy, stretching back generations. As dawn broke, Marcus pressed onward, his eyes scanning the horizon. The barren plateau gave way to hills, and beyond them, a faint outline rose against the morning haze walls, crumbled yet towering, half buried in the earth. His heart leapt into his throat. The city. It was real. His exhaustion fell away, replaced by raw determination. He quickened his pace, every step echoing with defiance. If mercenaries hunted him, if curses waited, if history itself resisted, none of it mattered. He would stand before that city's gates. For beyond those ruins lay the truth Rome had sworn to silence. Marcus stood on the ridge, breath shallow, staring at the silhouette that rose from the mist. What at first seemed like jagged cliffs revealed themselves as walls, massive, fractured, but still bearing the unmistakable symmetry of Roman engineering. The forbidden city was no longer legend. It existed, and it loomed before him in silence. He descended the slope slowly, each step dragging him deeper into a hollow where the air felt unnaturally still. No birds circled overhead, no insects hummed, no grass dared to grow near the ruins. The silence was suffocating, as if sound itself had been banished. Marcus's boots struck the earth with dull thuds, the only reminder that he was not walking in a dream. As he approached the gates, he traced his fingers along the fallen stones. They bore strange markings, not the crisp, disciplined letters of Rome, but symbols twisted, almost frantic, carvings that looked less like warnings and more like confessions scrawled by desperate hands. One phrase repeated again and again, "Do not enter." But Marcus did. The gate had long collapsed, leaving only broken columns and rusted iron hinges. But stepping through was like crossing an invisible threshold. The temperature dropped, and the weight of centuries pressed down upon him. He paused, heart hammering, and whispered into the void, "What happened here?" Inside, the city stretched like a corpse. Crumbled villas, shattered amphorae, the outlines of roads half buried in sand and dust. Statues toppled, their faces eroded into grotesque masks of grief. Marcus imagined families once living here, merchants, soldiers, children, all erased. Yet the silence was not empty. It whispered, not in words, but in impressions, sensations that prickled the skin. Fear, panic, abandonment. He found himself gripping the satchel tighter, reminding himself that he was flesh and blood, not a ghost. At the center of the city, a temple rose, its columns cracked but still standing. Unlike the rest of the ruins, it felt intact, as though time itself had spared it. Marcus's feet carried him forward, against his own caution. The door gaped open, shadows swallowing the threshold. He hesitated, and for a moment, Giancarlo's warning came back with cutting clarity. "Burn the parchment. It will destroy you." He entered anyway. The temple's interior reeked of decay, though no living thing remained to rot. Torches long dead still clung to the walls, and mosaics glittered faintly beneath centuries of grime. At the center stood an altar, blackened with scorch marks, as if fire had been both worshipped and feared here. Upon its surface lay shards of bronze tablets, inscribed with Latin. Marcus struggled to decipher in the dim light. He pieced the fragments together, breath catching as the words formed. "Plague of silence, carried by the air, no voice may leave. Rome commanded burial." Marcus staggered back, horror coursing through him. This city had not been cursed by gods or haunted by superstition. It had been smothered by something real. Something Rome could not control, a disease that robbed people of voice, then life, spreading like a shadow. No wonder the Senate forbade its memory. No empire could rule if its people believed even Rome was powerless. But even as the truth chilled him, footsteps echoed across the stone. Marcus spun. In the doorway stood the mercenary from the plateau, flanked by two others armed, their expressions hard. The firelight glinted off steel blades. "You've gone far enough," the man said, his voice low but carrying easily in the unnatural stillness. "Whatever lies here dies with you." Marcus's pulse surged. He had expected ruins, secrets, perhaps curses, but not this confrontation at the city's heart. His mind raced, torn between fight and flight. But one thing was clear. They had not come to explore. They had come to erase. The silence of the city deepened, pressing like a weight against his chest. Marcus understood now. He stood not only against the shadows of history, but against living men who feared its truth. And the gates of the forbidden city had only just opened. Marcus's back pressed against the altar as the three men advanced, their shadows stretching monstrously across the cracked mosaics. The mercenary leader's face was calm, almost regretful, as he drew his blade. "You should have listened in Rome," he said. "Some doors are not meant to be opened." Marcus's mind raced. He had no weapon beyond the small knife in his pack, no strength to match trained killers. Yet even in the suffocating silence of the temple, he felt the city itself urging him, "Do not yield." His eyes flicked to the shattered bronze tablets. If he died, the truth would die with him. "Why?" Marcus demanded, his voice hoarse. "Why protect a lie? Rome is gone. Its empire is dust. What are you so afraid of?" For the first time, the mercenary hesitated. His eyes hardened, but his voice trembled. "Because some truths do not fade. If the world learns what happened here, it will see that even Rome, eternal Rome, was fragile, and the powerful today cannot allow that." Marcus's breath caught. This wasn't just about the past, it was about control in the present. He realized then that Giancarlo and these men weren't driven by superstition. but by fear of losing power built on the illusion of Rome's invincibility. The mercenary stepped closer, blade raised. Marcus's hand scrambled along the altar, grasping a shard of bronze. The metal cut his palm, but he clenched it tight, holding it between himself and death. "If you kill me," he whispered, "you bury the truth again, but not forever. Someone else will find it, and when they do, you'll be nothing but another coward in history's shadow." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, from somewhere deep within the temple, a low rumble shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. The mercenaries froze, startled. Marcus's eyes widened. Was the city itself collapsing? Or was this the memory of its curse returning to life? The leader cursed, motioning his men back. But Marcus seized the moment. He dashed toward the side corridor, clutching the shard of bronze. Torches once mounted there had long crumbled, leaving only faint light from cracks above. He stumbled through the narrow passage, the mercenaries' footsteps pounding close behind. The corridor ended in a chamber. There, on the wall, a mural emerged from centuries of soot. Marcus raised the shard to scrape away grime, and what he revealed stole his breath. Painted in vivid, haunting detail was the story. Roman soldiers collapsing in silence, mouths open in screams that made no sound, priests burning offerings to no avail, senators sealing the gates with iron, their faces masks of fear. And beneath it all, written in bold Latin, "Here Rome learned humility." The mercenaries burst into the chamber. Marcus pressed himself against the mural, his fingers brushing those words. For an instant, he felt the weight of all who had died here, not cursed by gods, but by arrogance, by Rome's refusal to admit weakness. This was the unthinkable revelation. The empire had not been unshakable. It had cracked, and rather than confess, it had lied. The leader raised his sword again, his eyes blazing. "No one will ever see that." But before the blade could fall, another voice rang out from the doorway. "Stop!" Marcus turned, heart leaping. Professor Giancarlo stood there, his face pale, sweat gleaming on his brow. He looked not at Marcus, but at the mural. His lips trembled, as though he had seen a ghost. "You knew," Marcus accused. "You mocked me to keep me away, but you knew." Giancarlo's eyes glistened. "My father told me stories, forbidden ones. He swore me to silence. I thought they were madness until now." The mercenaries shifted uneasily, waiting for their leader's command. But Giancarlo stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "If you destroy him, you destroy me too. And then nothing will stop this truth from escaping." The air in the chamber thickened, charged with dread and revelation. Marcus realized the choice was no longer his alone. History itself had risen in this silent city, demanding to be remembered, and no blade could bury it forever. The chamber pulsed with tension, the mural's painted screams staring down at them all. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in the silence, each thud a drumbeat of defiance. Giancarlo stood between him and the mercenaries, trembling but unyielding. For the first time, Marcus saw not arrogance in the professor's eyes, but fear and something else, shame. The mercenary leader's jaw tightened. "You think one wall of lies changes anything? We were paid to erase this place. We will." He raised his sword again, but Giancarlo's voice cracked like thunder. "Then you are no better than the Senate that ordered this city's death. They feared weakness, so they buried the truth. And you, centuries later, you do the same. But history has a way of clawing itself back." The leader hesitated, his men shifting uneasily. Marcus realized the mercenaries were not immune to the weight of this place. The silence pressed on them too, the mural whispering in their bones. Slowly, Marcus lifted the shard of bronze, his blood still staining its edge. "This isn't just about Rome," Marcus said, his voice steady. "It's about every empire, every power that lies to hide its failures. If this city is erased again, then nothing changes. But if the world sees it, if they know Rome was humbled here, then maybe, finally, people will remember that even the mighty must bow to truth." The leader's eyes flickered with doubt, but pride steeled him. No one will believe you. Marcus met his gaze. They don't have to believe me. They'll believe this. He gestured to the mural, to the broken tablets, to the very stones that reeked of abandonment. The city itself speaks. Silence swallowed them all. And then, as though the city itself approved, a sudden gust rushed through the chamber, stirring centuries of dust. The mercenaries flinched, blades lowering instinctively. In that moment, the weight of the place broke them. They turned, muttering curses, retreating into the shadows, leaving Marcus and Giancarlo alone before the mural. Marcus's knees weakened, exhaustion washing over him. He slumped against the altar, his chest heaving. Giancarlo stood still, staring at the wall as though he'd been struck blind. I mocked you, the professor whispered, because I was terrified it might be true. And it is. Rome, the eternal Rome, was brought to its knees by something it could not control. And they lied. Weeks later, Marcus stood once more in the academy hall. But this time, silence reigned not from mockery, but from awe. Before him, projected on the great screen, were images of the ruins, the tablets, and the mural's words. Here, Rome learned humility. The same scholars who had laughed now leaned forward, pale, their eyes wide. Some muttered in disbelief, others scribbled notes feverishly. And at the edge of the hall, Giancarlo sat hunched. His arrogance burned away, replaced with quiet resignation. Marcus's voice carried steady. We chase history for glory, for pride, for proof that empires are immortal. But the truth is simpler and harder. Even the greatest can fall. Even Rome. He paused, letting the silence press into every corner of the hall. The lesson of this city is not in its curse, but in its humility. That strength is not eternal, and arrogance is the surest path to ruin. When he stepped down, applause thundered, not the shallow claps of courtesy, but the desperate roar of men and women shaken to their core. Marcus felt no triumph, only solemnity. He knew the truth he had unleashed would ripple through the world, unsettling the foundations of certainty. Later, standing alone in the courtyard, he looked toward the horizon. The city still lingered in his memory, the broken walls, the silent streets, the mural's haunting eyes. He realized he had not conquered it, nor uncovered it for himself alone. The city had chosen to reveal its truth, and he had merely carried it forward. The wind stirred through the trees, whispering like voices from ages past. Marcus closed his eyes and bowed his head. History belongs to the humble, he murmured, and to those who refuse to bury the truth. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.